Hello, everybody, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. Hope everyone's off to a great start to the week. Happy Tuesday. I'm excited to bring you another episode talking all things hockey and Bruins. I'm excited to have a good guest with me today. He does very, very good Bruins and hockey coverage for the Boston Globe. We're going to dive into a lot of Bruins content today on the show, so I'm really looking forward to this episode. Matt Porter, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Gabby. It's as we were talking about before we started rolling here. It's a little bit quiet around here. Summertime. Got some hockey, some vintage hockey on in the background. So just kind of doing my summer thing of getting ready, late summer thing, I should say, of getting ready for what should be a pretty exciting season.
Yeah, definitely. I know you were saying you were watching a game from 1991 in the background, which is super interesting because I feel like the game of hockey has just changed a lot since then.
Yeah, a ton, right? It's I mean, from things like I'm watching a game at the Boston Garden, which is a place I had a chance to see a bunch of games when I was much younger. To just the names and the speed of the game, the way people skate, wood sticks and that they're playing with and all that stuff. You even have a couple helmetless players. I mean, it's just it just looks like a completely different game. I think the game that they just put on now is the Bruins Capitals from, oh gosh, probably 90 or 91 or something like that. Adam Oates just scored a goal, so he's now, he's now about 60 years old. So
Yeah,
that's,
that's a name from the past.
yeah, that shows you how long ago we're talking.
Jeez, that's crazy. Sometimes it's cool to look back and watch older games like that, though, and just think about, the history and kind of everything that's happened since then.
Yeah, and one of the things that really sticks out when you watch hockey from the early '90s or even into like the mid late '90s before the lockout of 04, 05 is like how much physicality goes uncalled. Like it's just you can hook a guy, you can slash a guy, you can just hold a player coming down the wing and there's no call, which is
Yeah.
obviously today. If you get your stick parallel in a guy's hands, I mean, they're
Yep.
they're going to make that call every single time, and it's just a completely different game. The skating is the big thing that sticks out to me, and um, and obviously, when you put it in a historical team perspective, you're looking at a Bruins team here that just was a long way away from winning its first Stanley Cup since the Vietnam War.
No, it's so true. It's so true. Yeah, the skating, I've always talked about how impressive it is now, how good at skating they are, really.
Yeah, well, everybody trains year round. I mean, that I think there's a bunch of factors. Equipment is one of them, and um, strength training and all that. I think it's just the fact that if you're a hockey player, you are a professional for 12 months minus 12 months a year minus the 2 or 3 weeks that you might take off after the season, and it's just everybody can skate, everybody can fly, everybody can stick handle. Everybody has their own individual skills coach, which is something that was just completely unheard of back in the day. I mean, players would, report for camp, and we're talking even into the 80s and 90s. They would report for training camp in September and do a bunch of running and try to get back in shape. And it would take guys, 3, 4 weeks to get back into game shape, and then the start of the season would be a little sloppy, but
Yeah.
that's how they did it. And now it's just if you're not 100% for in your training for 12 months out of the year, minus those couple weeks that you go to Cozumel or the Amalfi Coast or whatever, you're way behind, and you're probably not even in the league.
Yeah, it's so true. It's just with the way that the game is played, the pace of it and the physicality, you really need to be in shape all year, really, to be able to keep up with everybody. Because if you're not, it really is going to show when the season starts.
Yeah, and early season hockey is still a little bit sloppy. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
relatively speaking. I mean, I think of the early season Bruins games that I've covered recently, and you look at guys like David Pastrnak. I mean, he's when he's on, he scores 4 goals against Anaheim early in the season. That probably doesn't happen later in the year as teams are getting ready for the playoffs. So things tighten up, and And there's always early season changes as well, which I'm sure we'll talk plenty about as it
Yep.
relates to the Bruins and some other teams. But guys are getting used to each other, and so when you're skating with new line mates, guys that have recently signed or got traded there or whatever, guys that got called up, whatever the case might be, there's a higher degree of difficulty. When you're trying to get on the same page with them, you might miss a pass and breakaway goes the other way. You got a goalie that's just getting himself into the mix, and scores can get out of hand pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. It's true. The beginning of the season, teams are bound to be a little bit rusty, and like you said, dealing with transitions, maybe some changes. But once it really gets later and later in the season, and teams are kind of fixing things and sharpening up, that's when you can really see, who's going to be competitive and who's not.
Absolutely, and I think it's going to be interesting. A team like the Bruins this year, they're not going to be. I don't think at their best until maybe January. If that. I
A
mean,
lot of changes. Yeah. A
yeah,
lot.
and injuries, especially with Marchand and McAvoy out and
Yeah.
Grzelcyk out. Those will be pretty unique things. For this team. I mean, they're not having Marchand. Okay, well, you can deal with that, but then not having McAvoy as well. Now you're in kind of uncharted territory, and not having Grzelcyk. I think some people's mileage may vary on Grzelcyk. I like him a lot as a player. Obviously, he's struggled a little bit in the playoffs when the guys are hitting to hurt you rather than hit or trying to move you out of the way.
So,
He's shown that he's I wouldn't call him a liability, but certainly a little bit of a concern there with injuries that he's had. So it's going to take them, I think, a while to get their game together. Obviously adding David Krejci back into the mix. What does he have early on? But definitely a fascinating team to watch this year for sure.
yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, one of the biggest things with this team now is a new head coach, which, when I found out about that news about how they were firing Bruce Cassidy, I was a little bit shocked because I didn't really think that he was kind of the main part of the problem with the Bruins and not being and coming up short in the playoffs every year and not being able to kind of go all the way, which a lot of us have been hoping for the last few years. And I think really that 2019 season when they couldn't finish that year, that really felt like it was supposed to have been their year. And then not being able to go all the way that year and then everything that's happened since then, I think there's obviously was some frustration within the organization. But I think having a new head coach to start with is in itself going to be interesting to kind of see how that works.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of angles with the Jim Montgomery hiring, and you know, his second chance. Obviously, that's one thing that jumps out at everybody. The way that
Yep.
it ended for him in Dallas, and but so there's plenty to go over there. But as far as Montgomery, the coach, rather than the person, I think it's going to be fascinating there too because he's a coach that had a ton of success in the college level and the junior level, won championships, developed players, and then got his shot to run an NHL bench and was only there for about a season and a half, not even. So we really don't know what he is as a coach. What are his strengths? What does he like to do? It's completely different than watching Bruce Cassidy for 6 years as a Bruins
Yeah.
coach. You know what he brings to the table. Before that, Claude Julien had a well-established system. Players knew what they had to do. Obviously, had the fixtures in the lineup like Chara and Thomas and Tuukka Rask for the latter part of his tenure. You knew what you were getting with a Claude Julien Bruins team, and you knew what you were getting with a Bruce Cassidy Bruins team. I don't know what to make of Jim Montgomery. In his initial comments, to us and in the media, one of the things that sticks out to me is he's a coach that's going to be adaptable. He's going to assess what he has and then try to make the most of it. And every coach will say that, but we don't really know anything more than that at this point. He's a coach that wants to develop young talent. He's a coach that wants to play offensively while maintaining the defensive structure. I mean, these are all very common things to say in your introductory press conference. How it plays out on the ice, I'm very eager to find out.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people on Twitter were reacting to the hiring when it happened, and I saw mixed feelings on it for sure. Some people seemed like they were happy about it, some people not so happy about it. Some people were like, we should have kept Cassidy. So there was a lot of, chatter on Twitter, but I feel like, people can have thoughts and people can speculate, but it's really, really hard to know what's going to translate and what's not because it's a new team for him that he's coaching, a new situation he's coming into, and you don't really know what he's going to try to implement that's going to work with this team and what's not. So I do feel like at the beginning, like comes with any new coach for any team, I feel like there's going to be some trial and error involved at the beginning to really see what's going to work and what's not going to work. And maybe it works with him, maybe he's here for a year, they have a lot of success and they want to keep him. Maybe he comes in, it doesn't really work for a year. They give him another year just to see, and it doesn't work. But I feel like bringing on a new coach is all experimentation at the beginning as it is because you don't really know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So it's really hard for me to really draw a conclusion on that hiring until I really see what goes on during the season and kind of what strategies he uses, how he works with these players, and what works and what doesn't work. Because his coaching style is probably going to end up being a lot different from how Bruce Cassidy was with this team. And so it's hard to really say for sure whether he's going to be a good coach for this team or not.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of coaches, especially when you're taking over a team that has made the playoffs the last 6 years, does have veterans in place, does have players who are used to doing things a certain way. I don't think you want to come in and change too much. I think that
Yeah.
like when Bruce Cassidy took over, he was Claude Julien's assistant. Obviously, they had that previous relationship. Cassidy came up through the Providence, organization, or the Bruins organization in Providence, I should say. Had been with the organization since 2008, and when he was hired as head coach in 2017. So he didn't want to change too much. He just wanted to kind of tweak a few things that Claude Julien was doing. Wanted to get the defensemen more active. Didn't want them to collapse as much in the defensive zone. That was a big thing. Stopping entries at the blue line rather than letting teams gain the zone and then try to pack it in. So that really helped some of the offensive defensemen like a Grizzly, like a Charlie McAvoy, produce more offensively. One thing we know about Jim Montgomery's style that he wants to bring to the table here is that he wants to activate the defenseman even more. So that means, getting more shots from the point, having them, move more at the offensive blue line. That's something that Cam Neely talked about as well. We need more production from the offense. He was saying about the Bruins. So we'll see how that bears out. I mean, obviously, again, like we've talked about, they're going to have some issues on the back end without two of their best offensive guys, and Grizzly and McAvoy out for, at least until Thanksgiving, as far as we know. We're hearing this offseason that they're on track, and if they are on track with their injury recoveries, both of them have shoulder surgeries that they're coming off of, then that would put them back around Thanksgiving. So, I don't think you try to change too much if you're Jim Montgomery, at least not early. But we do know that with Dallas, he had as he called it, a process that he wanted to see his team show him every single game, and that was 56 to 60% of face-offs. That's important to him, winning those, giving up very few odd man rushes. That's important to him. A commitment to blocking shots. No undisciplined penalties, winning the special teams battle, the net front battle. I mean, these are all hallmarks of any winning team in the league, certainly. But that's something that he'll be preaching, we know, early on.
Yeah, he's definitely very knowledgeable about the game, being a former player, being in the college scene when it came to coaching, also having experience, obviously, coaching in Dallas. So I think he definitely has a lot of knowledge just of the game and how he feels like things should operate. And I feel like I agree with you. I don't think changing a whole lot is a good idea because this is a team that has consistently been to the playoffs. So, from a talent standpoint that they have that and they are there, and whatever they were doing was working for the most part to an extent, and then obviously ran into good teams in the playoffs. But I think will recognize that. And I think it's just a matter of trying to come in, maybe clean up some things, strengthen a little bit of what were some of their weaknesses at the end of last season, and hopefully trying to, set them up for even further success. Because I know it's tough to watch this team who, you feel like has that potential, but they just come up short because they run into other teams who just, simply might have been more physical than them, or were a little bit deeper than them. And I think those were things that they did try to address in this offseason. And so I'm hoping that they can go into this season with especially with Bergeron coming back, maybe this is the year where they're like, okay, like let's try to make this our year.
Yeah, it definitely does have that last run feel to it,
Yeah,
with
it does.
Bergeron's age being 37 and Krejci at 36, and you have Marchand at 33. Hall's 30 now. I mean, there's not, it's a team that, the core, the leading players are definitely older, and that's going to be another big thing for Montgomery to accomplish is bringing the best out of these young players. And you can look at, uh, that's been a big point of debate or contention with fans that I see online. They're is it the roster or is it the coaching? Well, a lot of people seem to think that it's the roster, that they don't have the right pieces in place.
Yep.
Sweeney hasn't made the right moves, but having young players like a Charlie McAvoy, like a David Pastrnak come in and be contributors and stars for your team, obviously that goes a long way to fixing any management mistakes. And if you believe that it is all on Sweeney, Montgomery can do a lot to help that. And I think that's going to be a huge part of his start here, and it already has been, connecting with young players, reaching out to guys like Trent Frederick and Jack Studnicka and even Fabian Lysell, to try to get them on your page and understand, this is what we expect from you. Are you ready for this? And, Montgomery has said in recent weeks in different interviews that he's done, that he has connected with, Frederick and other players who, really were kind of the reasons those relationships falling sour with Cassidy, that Cassidy finds himself in Vegas and not Boston today.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's definitely kind of sad turning the page on Bruce Cassidy. I think he did a lot for the Bruins, and I think he overall was a good coach for the team. And, like you said, from a coaching standpoint, they can only work with what they have. It's not on them to, really be the ones to bring in new players, and that's kind of, they can work with what they have. And I think Bruce Cassidy did his best with what he had, and I think there was a lot of talent on that team. And obviously there's frustrations involved, from maybe the angle of Don Sweeney and looking at him and what he hasn't done over the last few years and what he has done, and people kind of saying he hasn't made the right moves essentially to kind of build a championship team, and that there's always kind of been holes there. But I think, like you said before, this has really that feel of this is the last chance we probably have with some of these guys. And so let's try to make the most of it, and developing that young talent in the process that is going to be the future of the team, and kind of finding that balance of, yeah, we want to give these veterans their last shot at that Stanley Cup, but we also want to develop these young guys even more, since they're going to be, the future of this team going forward. And, I think overall, I think they made a couple moves in the offseason too that we can touch on. But, how surprised were you about Bergeron, and even Krejci coming back too? Because, I think with Bergeron, there was this whole, obviously after the season ended last year, that was kind of the main topic of conversation, was whether he was going to come back or not. And I was very, very much on the fence about it, and really mixed, because I could have seen reasons for both as to why he might not, and reasons why he might. But to me, it almost feels like he's coming back because he really feels like this team has a genuine shot to give it one last run with him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's his main reason. It's the team can still win. He still has a chance to do this. And when when he's leaning towards coming back, and David Krejci says, "Yeah, man, I'm in," that can only strengthen his resolve to want to come back. I mean, for him first, it's about his wife Stephanie and their kids, and are they on board? If so, then the hockey takes care of itself, provided he's willing. Provided he's willing to put himself through it. He's been rehabbing an elbow injury that looks to be on track. He's obviously logged a lot of miles on NHL ice over the past 18 years, and it can't be easy to psych yourself up for a 19th year, but when you have that shot to go do it again and make a deep run, then that's especially with guys like David Krejci and Marchand, who you've been with for so long, then that's that can be motivating, obviously. Yeah, I've been through this a few times now with guys like Chara. Is he coming back? And I remember after 2020, it was kind of hard to get a feel for things because everything was on Zoom, but you just kind of got the sense that he was considering retirement. Obviously, given his age, wasn't surprising, but he's Zdeno Chara. He wants to be the last man standing, and I as I watched him go through this, and it does relate to Bergeron. I thought that Chara was the type of guy that he would be like a Nick Lidstrom. Once his play slipped, he was done. He wasn't gonna let himself be the third defenseman on a team, but I was proven wrong there. Obviously, I think he might even still come back. I don't know that for sure, but I think he's gonna, or at least what his agent told me a couple of weeks ago. I think he's going to, give it a ride in September and see if anybody has an interest in signing him, as veteran help and kind of a big voice in the room, that kind of thing. And we'll see. With Bergeron, after the Carolina series, I was talking to him after Game 7 and could not really get a sense of what he wanted to do because he said, I got to take some time. And
yeah, I genuinely don't think he knew. He probably just wanted to talk to his family and try to figure out what would be best for him at that point.
For sure. And I think he, being Bergeron, I wouldn't expect this any other way. He, wanted to make sure that if it was it, then, he, had a chance to hug all of his teammates, and he had a chance to, to have that as a lasting memory. But as he said in recent weeks, that wasn't the memory he wanted. Going out into Game 7 like that, and I guess overall it doesn't surprise me that he's coming back because he can still play. I think that's the long and short of it, is he's still an elite player in this league, and the Bruins are incredibly lucky to get both him and David Krejci on the contracts that they got, given their cap situation. It just another line in the in the career logs of two players that have given a lot to this franchise.
Yeah, it's true. And I feel like they deserve to have that one last hurrah. And hopefully that results in a championship, ideally. Obviously, we don't know, but I think, they really are trusting in this team. They've done so much for this organization. And I think they really feel like they want to give it that last run. And obviously, with Bergeron talking to his family and everything was definitely a factor. I'm sure his wife's probably in support of the whole thing too, and being able to come back. Because like you said, I mean, yeah, like he still can play, and him being here, I think, is going to be huge from a leadership standpoint and just a locker room standpoint, having him around still this year, especially with some of the changes that the team is going through. I think having that veteran who is solid, who has been here and is able to kind of be able to come back and say, yeah, I want to do this with you one last year, I think could really be a difference from a locker room standpoint too, for some of these younger players.
Yeah, Gabby, it's a great point too, because when you think about having a new coach here, all these young players you're trying to bring in. Think of guys like Lysell and even players who have been around but don't really have the a ton of NHL experience. An Oscar Steen, a Jack Ashan, guys like that. Even put Trent Frederick in the mix. He's still a young player in this league. To have a guy like Patrice Bergeron who has the ultimate respect of everybody he plays with and against. But certainly, such a deep respect from his teammates, for him to listen to Jim Montgomery and understand what Montgomery is saying. He'll probably get it quicker than pretty much anybody else, and on the team, the concepts, the coaching style, that sort of thing. to have Bergeron translating it for the younger players, I mean, that is a resource that, some teams just don't have. They don't have a guy with Bergeron's mind to be able to say, oh, yeah, okay, here, let me say it this way, what Jim Montgomery's telling us, what the coach is telling us. Here's how I can make this apply to, what you're trying to do as a young player. Montgomery has said in his initial press conference with us that, he talked to Bergeron on the phone, his first call that he made to a player, or I don't even know if Bergeron called him or he called him. But, he said that Bergeron was like an assistant coach. And that is hugely important, I think, for a team, that is trying to bring in the young players, and even for the veterans, for Bergeron to say, no, maybe you're not getting it here. Think of it this way. And then obviously what happens on the ice, Bergeron's going to do the right thing. And that obviously is going to translate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's going to make a huge difference here. I was super happy when the news came out because it would have been really tough. I mean, I would have understood it if he said, "Yeah, I mean, this is it for me. I'm hanging it up," because he wanted to spend that quality time with his family, and after the career he had, it would have been well deserved if he did decide to do that. But I was really happy that he decided he wanted to give it that last run, because that alone in itself really, I feel like, gives this team such a different feel and a different vibe going into the season.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if they didn't have, if they don't have Bergeron coming to the season, they don't have Krejci either, I think.
Yep. Oh, yeah, I agree. I think all of that was dependent on Bergeron's decision.
Yeah, and then what are you doing at center, right? I mean, if they've made the Zaka trade, I mean, maybe he's your number one center. I mean, that's not exactly, where you want to go. And if that's the case, I mean, it is an interesting thought exercise to consider what would have happened if they didn't sign David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron, because this is a team that still has talent. I mean, I've heard calls from fans, I've gotten emails and tweets and messages about it, people sounding off about this, saying, well, why don't they just tear it down and rebuild? Well, because you have a lot of talent. I mean, when you have David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy and Brad Marchand, Taylor Hall, you're not really going to tear it down. I mean, when you look at the teams that are competing for that number one overall pick next year and a chance to draft Connor Bedard, you're looking at teams that have a lot less talent than the Bruins.
Yeah, exactly.
But that being said, if you are a team that is going to be missing, if you don't have Bergeron and Krejci, so now you have the huge hole at center. Yep. You have Swayman and Ullmark, but yet, you have no McAvoy, no Marchand, no Grzelcyk for a little while there. What are you doing exactly? Can you convince your players, and maybe even more importantly, can you convince your fans that we're going to take a step back and we're going to try to, get a high pick? You can't come out and say that. It's interesting to think about. I don't think it would ever happen. Talking with, ownership, the Jacobs family, during Montgomery's press conference, you heard what they said. And, you can tell that there's no appetite for a rebuild, especially coming off the pandemic when, they don't want to lose any ticket sales because, they're in a business and concessions where they simply, got hammered, as so many businesses did. But certainly the entertainment concession business, that they run took some big losses. So financially, doesn't make sense to them, but it is interesting to think about.
No, it is a really interesting concept. And I feel like for them, they are just not in a place right now where they need to do a full-on rebuild, and I just feel like there's just too much talent on that team for them to be put in that category with other teams who might be trying to do a full rebuild. And I feel like they have a pretty complete roster in terms of right now the talent that they have on that team, and I just feel like they're not in a place where they need to do a rebuild right now. And I feel like that was a little bit unknown, after this season. It was really unknown. And again, all the dominoes, I feel like, were going to fall depending on that decision by Bergeron. And I feel like what his decision kind of would make all the difference in terms of what this roster might have potentially looked like. And so I just feel like that decision, to me, kind of solidifies that they are not really in a place where they need to rebuild right now. But it definitely is an interesting concept to think about that, for sure.
Yeah, and what's regardless, they are in a place over the next 2 years where you're going to see either a lot of change or a lot of moves being made.
Yeah.
When I say change, I mean guys leaving the team.
Yep.
Or you're going to see Don Sweeney have to sign a guy, sign a lot of guys. Because when you look at, their cap friendly page, and they've got 4 forwards signed after this year. And that's Pastrnak, Hall, Coyle, and DeBrusk. That's it. Marchand, excuse me.
Which is crazy.
Marchand, Hall, Coyle, and DeBrusk. Pastrnak needs a contract, obviously. Um, and Oscar Steen too. He has a deal.
Oh
And
yes.
then
Yeah.
and then on defense, beyond the year after that, um, you only have, and we're talking 2024, 2025. You only have McAvoy, Lindholm, and Carlos signed. So this is a roster where you could see a lot of change over the next couple of years, and it's speaking of thinking about the rebuild, kind of that, all the changes you could make, you just get kickstarted early and cut bait and try to tank. I could never see it happening, not under this ownership, not under this hockey leadership. But I think regardless, you're going to see a lot of movement, and things could look very, very, very different over the next couple of years for the Bruins.
Yep, and that's why it's almost like they really kind of are in a win now mode type of mentality, or at least they should be, because while they still have this core together, before some of these changes start to happen, it's really, to me, it really feels like we really should try to win now when we have all these people still, and then when the changes start to happen, there might be a little bit of some frustration in terms of a rebuild or some question marks surrounding certain players. And so I just feel like before that starts to happen, this really feels like it's win now. And I feel like they've been in that mode the last couple of years, especially last year. And now that it didn't happen last year, I feel like this really is that year.
Yeah, and if you're the Bruins, you also have to be mindful of trying to get guys like Lysell, John Beecher, Stadnika, obviously, Victor Berglund, on defense, Jack Ashan. These guys, you have to try to work them in the mix, and because you got to know what you have
Yep.
going forward. Are these going to be players where you can start to see them building NHL careers and more importantly, impactful NHL careers for the Boston Bruins? You got to start to see that now, and I think the injuries early on, especially up front, will really help the Bruins. Get those guys in the mix. So, I can see Lysell with Marchand out. He plays a different position, but if Lysell is a right winger, maybe DeBrusk can move to the left side where his natural position. Can he get some reps? Lysell is junior eligible, so either he makes a splash or he goes back. That's basically the deal. And then a guy like Georgi Merkulov, who looked really good last year in Providence after he signed out of Ohio State. Can he do anything at the NHL level at this point? My guess would be no, but that remains to be seen. It's happened before with David Pastrnak. Everybody ticketed him, to go back and we're playing the minors, and he did that for a year, but boy, he made them think. In training camp in 2014. So you got to see what you have, and I think they're pretty well set up. Despite everything, to do that.
Yeah, I agree. You want to get them that exposure and kind of see what you have going forward, who's going to be, you think, reliable in the future and that you can really utilize. And I think now is a good opportunity for them to be able to start doing that and working some of those guys in. And I think, I think they know kind of what their vision is going into this season. They want to win, obviously, but it's definitely a good opportunity knowing that some of these guys won't be here much longer to take advantage of that and kind of see what these guys do have. I definitely am with you on that. I think they will do a good job of that, and I think it's super important that this year they really utilize that opportunity and take advantage of that and be able to see because these guys could really be your core in the future. So you want to definitely see, do you see this person contributing longer term to your team or not? And I think now is getting it ahead of that and starting to think about that now is super important. But I know you did mention this before, and I do want to get your overall thoughts on that Zacha trade. Obviously Hala left going to Jersey. How did you feel about that trade? Like, do you think that was a pretty equal trade? Like, do you think both teams benefited from it, or where are you kind of thinking about that? Like, where are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was very interesting to see the move when it happened because you don't always see hockey trades. And this to me was a
Yeah.
hockey trade. It's a
Yeah.
New Jersey gets a guy in Eric Holla who is a reliable, two-way center who can play basically any role that you need him to. He can play the left side, he can play the middle, play penalty kill, play power play, second unit. He's got some playmaking ability. If he's put with offensive guys, he can be more of a defensive guy, even though he really doesn't want to be. Um, I think he's a pretty good second line center, or at least a capable second line center for a team in New Jersey that isn't really expecting to do great things this year. I think he'll do fine. And then in Zacha, he's a guy that I know the Bruins have looked at over the past few years. He does live here, like there's a fit here. He lives here in the off season. His partner's from here. I think she's from Needham, and so he's always wanted to play here. And he's a big body with some offensive talent, and sometimes guys like him, they have a great junior career, and they're drafted high, and then it doesn't quite work for them at the NHL level, and then they find the right fit, and the Bruins are betting that can be his spot here, or his path here, that he can play with the best teammates that he's played with since he was playing with David Pastrnak in the Czech junior team. He's never played with a guy like that. Unless you count MVP year Taylor Hall, who he also played with in New Jersey. So from a familiarity aspect, and not to mention one of his best friends from childhood. They've known each other since they were in like kindergarten. Is Jakub Zaboral. So maybe
Really?
there's
I didn't know that.
yeah, they're from the same
That's
town in Czech.
interesting.
Yeah, they're from the same town, and
That's so
they were
cool.
they were teammates all through the years growing up, and they remain close today. So that's maybe especially a guy like Zaboral, maybe he can get some kind of fun out of this. And sometimes I don't want to say that's all it takes. It's just playing with a guy that but certainly it makes coming to the rink more fun when you have that familiarity, and there's definitely going to be some on ice chemistry between those two. So it's not like they're center and wing kind of connection. They're Zaboral's a defenseman, and obviously Zacha's a center slash wing, but they're going to enjoy playing with each other, obviously, and it'll just help Zacha's transition. Maybe he starts on a line with Krejci and Pastrnak. That would be obviously three guys that speak the same language, have similar ways of thinking about the game. Came up kind of the same way in the same Czech system, and for a kind of a wide open team, so to speak, this year with a new coach and kind of everybody's kind of open to new approaches and stuff like that. To have those three guys with some instant chemistry, that can certainly help out the Bruins as they try to find their way under Jim Montgomery. So I think overall, I really liked the trade. I thought it was a good trade for both teams. I was, like everybody, I was wondering, what's the number going to look like? If they can get Zacha signed, is he going to go long term? Is he going to go 1 year? I think, given what we talked about a minute ago with all the contracts that the Bruins have coming up, I think 1 year at $3.5 million is perfectly fine. And obviously, Zacha is going to be looking for a long-term extension after having a great year. So the rest is up to him.
Yeah, I think there wasn't really any, harm with this trade. I feel like it was kind of both teams kind of addressed things that they needed, and I feel like from, a Bruin standpoint, like you said, I feel like he has the potential to really enjoy playing here and really be successful here. And obviously, the 1 year I think makes a lot of sense just so they can really see how he does contribute and how he does show up and perform. And then if he performs really, really well and he does actively contribute, then they evaluate that later on. But I think how they went about it now with the 1 year deal is smart, because then they can kind of it gives him an opportunity to really prove himself and show if he really does want to play here, then he has to show up and be able to perform. And I think then obviously they evaluate that contract as the time comes. But yeah, I didn't hate it either. I didn't really, I just didn't think it was, obviously it wasn't like this drastic, crazy trade, which they had already said they weren't really going to make a lot of drastic moves this offseason anyway. And so I don't think there's really much harm in this. I actually think that he could be, a good role player on this team. And I think he really could contribute, especially with, like you said, his familiarity with the area and being able to, have a desire to want to play here. I think is going to be good for him and for the team with the adjustment period. And so it'll be good to kind of see what he actually does to contribute. But I don't really think either team won or lost the trade. I think it was just a pretty, even trade on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, Zacha. When you think about it this way, Zacha got what every player wants, which is that he just can live in the same house. Like he doesn't have to go any. He just moves into his summer home, basically.
Right, it's like ideal, yeah.
Yeah, and it's you just look at all the contracts they have coming off the books. I mean, it works, and Zacha's a good player. I mean, he's somebody that was drafted 6th overall in that famous 2015 draft that everybody wants to talk about.
Yeah.
And but there's a reason for that. It's because of his size. It's because of his skill, and he's a very very good player as a junior. And had some ups and downs, in the NHL with New Jersey, some coaching changes, high expectations, all that. And, it's a guy 6'3", if you can, teach him how to use that size a little bit more, if you can teach him how to shoot, a little bit more willingly, then he is a guy that can get you 50 points. And especially playing with, guys like Pastrnak and Krejci, that's definitely intriguing if you're a Bruins fan.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's definitely a lot of positives that could come from him being on this team. And I think ultimately, it made sense from a productivity standpoint. I think he's going to be able to really contribute. And, hopefully he does have a really good year, because then they can obviously reevaluate the contract situation. And, I think he will. I think he's going to show that he wants to be here. And I think he's going to make that whole trade and that move worthwhile for them. So I'm kind of excited to see him here and kind of see what he does to contribute, to everybody else on this team. And I think I'm excited to see that, as much as we will miss Hala. I know a lot of people are going to miss him, but I think, ultimately at the end of the day, it kind of made sense to do what they did. And hopefully he finds success over there with the Devils. And I think, I think he will. So I think overall that trade, neither team can look at that and really complain about the trade and what they got out of it. So I think overall it was pretty even, and I think that's good. But obviously going into this season, there's still a lot of good teams that they're going to have to compete with. But just looking at this team right now, and just in general, the moves that they made in free agency this year, are you happy overall with what they did? Do you think that they should have done more? Do you think that they are in good shape going into the season based on the free agency moves that they did make? Or, where is your head at with that?
Well, I don't think they did a whole lot in free agency, and I think that's by design.
They didn't say they said they kind of weren't planning on it either, though.
Yeah, it was by design. I mean, they're a team that's very close to the cap. They knew they had to keep room open for Bergeron and Krejci. They didn't really know what that was going to look like going forward. They don't want to have too many commitments, because they are trying to sign David Pastrnak to a long-term extension. It's going to be, at the very least, Charlie McAvoy's deal at 8 years times $9.5 million. I would not be surprised to see Pastrnak get well over $10 million. He is that kind of player. The market has, and the market has gone there as well, with Jonathan Huberdeau getting 10.5. I think the Johnny Gaudreau contract is not a great comparison, because he just surprised everybody for him to get under 10 million after a season where he had 115 or 17 points, whatever it was. So I think, the Bruins is from a roster perspective, they, when healthy, I think they look great. Great being a relative term. I think, there's a bunch of other teams that also look great, but, they, you like their depth on the left wing with Hall, DeBrusque, and, I guess you'd throw Zaka in there. He can also play center, obviously. Frederick in that mix, and Marchand. Down the middle with Bergeron and Krejci and Coyle and Zaka and Nosek, they look pretty good. The right side is a little bit lighter, I would say, with Pasternak and Craig Smith, and maybe that's your spot for a Lysell or a Stadnicka. Mark McLaughlin has shown that he can kind of play some fourth line minutes and maybe even move up to a third line role. But he's kind of still an untapped guy as far as potential goes. On defense, the right side to me is looking pretty thin, especially with McAvoy out. Brandon Carlo is your number one guy on that side.
Yeah.
With Clifton and, I guess the number 3 right D right now would maybe be like a Connor Carrick who's played in the league, but certainly nothing to write home about there. So, you're hoping that you don't have too many more injuries early on because, if you fall too far behind, in the Eastern Conference, boy, it's tough to make up ground after Thanksgiving, in December. So that's going to be kind of a concern as health early on. But it's hard to say. It's hard to have expected too much more from them given the situation they were in as far as free agency goes. Being close to the cap as they were with the commitments that they have. So it's kind of one of those seasons that, and I've written about this, where, for Sweeney, Don Sweeney, he's pretty lucky that things broke the way they did, with Bergeron and Krejci coming back on those, inexpensive deals. I mean, that's pretty much the way it had to go for him to be able to weather this season as a general manager and, get to the next phase where you have all this money coming off the books. You have, like a dozen players with expiring contracts and, be able to kind of restructure your team going forward around, the next wave of guys like Pasternak and McAvoy and Lindholm, Taylor Hall for a few years, et cetera. Oh, and of course, Jeremy Swayman. They still have to sign him as well. So that's, things broke very well for Sweeney in that regard. And as far as what he was able to do, I think you give him a solid B. They added some NHL quality depth with, guys like Carrick and AJ Greer, Vinny Lettieri, Keith Kincaid, not guys that you're, hopeful to play, but certainly, you can survive a 10-game stretch with AJ Greer as a fourth liner in your lineup. And he's probably not going to hurt the team.
Yeah, it was primarily depth moves that they were making, which absolutely makes sense. I mean, it definitely, he was banking on the Bergeron and Krejci thing to happen as it did. It seemed like he approached this free agency as if they were coming back, essentially. Really, really banking on that happening. So obviously it's really, really good that they did, because this team, like we talked about before, would be in a lot rougher shape if that didn't happen. We'd be looking at a lot thinner, of a roster from that standpoint. And trying to figure some more things out. So he came into this free agency hoping, I think, that was going to happen, and really under the assumption maybe that was going to happen. And so we're really, really lucky that things happened to fall like that. And Bergeron made the decision he did, and then resulting in Krejci making that decision he did too. And so I think, it's all of that as a result of those two. And it now the moves that he did make really overall are fine, because by that all happening, it really doesn't feel like he needed to address a lot of big holes during this free agency. And like you said, with the cap that they're dealing with, and what all the contracts they have right now, I think it kind of makes sense that they really were going for depth. And these aren't people that you're going to expect to contribute regularly, but that can contribute if, obviously we hope this doesn't happen, but injuries or other things that come up, they're guys that can be productive enough, which I feel like is all that they were really looking for. Just people who could fill some holes from a depth standpoint and could be productive enough if you needed them to kind of play more and contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're thinking, well, okay, if I'm, in a vacuum, if I'm, building a roster, I'd much rather have Curtis Lazar as my number 4 right wing than AJ Greer. Okay, well, that's fine, but Curtis Lazar took a 3-year deal to go back to he's from BC, so he took a 3-year deal to go back to, the Canucks and, near where he's from. So it's, that's, if you're the Bruins, that's bad business to give him that. And, he's a nice player, but, you can fill that hole much more cheaply. It's not unlike a Sean Corrali a couple of years ago, took a, more money and more term to go, play in his hometown in Columbus. And that's kind of the way you have to do things in this cap era. Just try to fill holes with guys on minimum deals or under $1 million. Where you get into trouble is where you sign guys like Nick Foligno who don't have a ton left. David Backes, those kind of contracts where you're committing more money to more established players. Sweeney has his reasons for doing that in both of those cases, but obviously have not worked out well. If you can avoid doing that, then you're probably doing okay as a GM.
Yeah, seriously, it's true though, and I feel like sometimes people forget that teams don't have all the money to spend, and they can't just go out and just pay all kinds of players. I mean, I feel like sometimes people forget that, and sometimes you do have to go with somebody who could be a good alternative, but is a little bit cheaper and might not be the exact same as what you're hoping for, but at least can kind of help get the job done and fill a hole in some capacity. And that's how they did approach this, because they're very, very aware that they do have some expensive contracts on their books right now. And I feel like people sometimes miss that aspect of it, that, we need to be aware of the fact that this, the cap is a thing, and we need to keep in mind that when it comes to making some of these moves. And I think he went about it in a really, really smart way in terms of how can I fill these holes, but not have to spend as much money because of everybody else, the other contracts that I have that are more expensive that, I have to keep in mind. So I think there has to be a good balance. Obviously, you don't want to not go out and spend money on anybody because you're not going to win that way either. But these teams don't have all the money in the world to spend on every single player that fans might want to see, play for your team either. So there has to be that good balance of the two. And I think Sweeney's very, very good at that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot that goes into free agency, obviously, as well. I mean, some guys, don't want to play for certain teams, and Boston doesn't typically fall into that nearly as much as, say, a Winnipeg or, teams like that, this team, some players just don't want to play in Winnipeg. To name one example of several around the league, Arizona, being another. Boston can be pretty attractive to a lot of players because of, the city and where, the team is, in its development and, competitive, aspect. They have a chance to win. So, it's certainly, I look at the Bruins, I'm thinking, well, okay, they probably could use more right side depth on defense. Well, you kind of need a specific player. Connor Carrick is really that kind of guy. 2-way deal, cheap money, can play in the league, that, and you're really just kind of hoping that he's going to be there until Charlie McAvoy gets back. So it's, you're a very narrow definition of guys that you want if you're the Bruins this offseason. I think they did about as well as they could have to fill those holes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't have an issue with how this offseason went for them at all. I think they did kind of what they needed to do. Nobody should have really been expecting a lot of big moves because of the situation they're in, nor did they really, really need to make a lot of big moves. I'm excited to see how everything goes with Montgomery, and I'm excited to see kind of just how this season goes, because I think this really does feel like it has that energy of, one last run, like let's go out and do it this year. And hopefully that they take that energy, with Bergeron and Krejci, and they take that energy of them being here still to really go out and try to, win one more with them while they have them here. And it just seems like it's that type of season, and we can only hope that, things can go their way. There's a lot of deep teams like we talked about, especially in the Eastern Conference. But I think they'll be right there. I think they can compete with those teams, definitely, if they can figure things out, early enough, which hopefully that they can. And I hopefully going into the season with Montgomery, I think as long as they can kind of adapt earlier on, I think that they can be up there with those teams in the Eastern Conference. And I think it's going to be this team is going to be fun to watch this year, I think.
Yeah, more so in the second half, right? I mean, that would be my expectation for them is weather the storm, try to be a little bit better than treading water early on while, Marchand and McAvoy and Grizzly are still recovering. And,
yeah, because you don't want to fall too far back at the beginning to the point where by the time they do come back, it's just too late and you can't really recover from that, because that would just be unfortunate.
Right, and like a fourth place finish, and a second wild card. I mean, that's not going to hurt them. They'll still get in. They'll hope that they're playing, their best at the right time. But I think you can kind of see them a little bit like Tampa, that just kind of does what it has to do in the regular season and then tries to turn it on in the playoffs. And certainly, it's a team that will have all the motivation come April to get it done again.
That is exactly what Tampa does. They just kind of, float through the regular season, kind of do what they have to do to get in. And then they just really turn it on when they have to, when it matters most. And that's when you see them play their best hockey is, towards the end of the season, straight into the playoffs. That's just how that team operates. I mean, obviously Tampa is a very, very good deep team and they're tough. So, I was happy that Colorado won this past year, but Tampa still that's their formula. That's just how they do it. They play obviously good hockey in the regular season because they have to in order to get in, but you don't really see fully what they can do until the postseason.
Yeah, and that's they're the model. Even though they didn't win it last year, I think everybody still considers them the model franchise, given the way that they've navigated so many different situations in the past several years. I mean, they've been through it. They've won and lost. I mean, they were swept by Columbus in that crazy series a couple of years back, and then just went on an absolute tear. You have the goaltender. I mean, that makes a huge difference, and they certainly do. The Bruins can only hope that Jeremy Swayman can have a career like Andrei Vasilevsky. We'll see.
That's what we're hoping. But I do like so far what I've seen from him. Obviously he's still young and he's still developing, but I think so far what we've seen from him has been good.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of potential there. Obviously, I think he certainly has the head for the game. He has the athleticism. Like all young goaltenders, you expect a little bit of a regression once teams figure out what he does and what he likes to do and get a book on him, so to speak. That happens everywhere. We saw it with Carter Hart in Philadelphia. Looked great when he started, had a really bad sophomore year, and then he's kind of figured it out a little bit since then, earned himself another contract. And he's a guy that you're expecting bigger things from in the years to come. So if Swayman isn't ready this year, or if teams have kind of figured out something about him, then they have Linus Ullmark, who I think obviously is hungry to play himself. They have a good relationship, but they both want to be the guy. So it could be ideally Jim Montgomery has his way, things will be for him like they were in his first year in Dallas, when they had a bunch of injuries with the Stars, and they had incredible goaltending from Ben Bishop and Anton Khudobin to keep them in the mix, and then they turned it on in the second half. So maybe we'll see a repeat of that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that'd be awesome. Yeah, but no, I think it'll definitely be an interesting season this year for the Bruins. I think obviously everyone's kind of just curious to see how the season goes, but definitely a lot of things to look forward to with this as well with this team. So that's good. But I'm definitely looking forward to when the season does start. It is coming up. It'll be here kind of before we know it. So the summer is ending and the fall is starting, and it's going to be starting back up again in full swing soon. So.
Yep, training camp in a few weeks, rookie camps, all the season preview stuff, from my perspective at the Globe, and we'll be all over it.
Well, I appreciate that because I really, really like your coverage and your content, and you do a great job. So.
Oh, thanks, Gabby. Much appreciated, and thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Everybody, as always, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Really looking forward to the season. Hope you all are as well. I will definitely catch you all next time and hope you have a great rest of your week. Go Bruins.